Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation. And viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, an update from the Navajo Nation, which has turned towards aggressive vaccination to battle COVID.
The fight is not with one another. The enemy is COVID-19. And in our way of life teaching, that's the monster.
Plus, the legislature is set to start its 60-day lawmaking session. We'll preview the action. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. There's a lot of uncertainty in our show this week as lawmakers head back to the state capitol. COVID protocols will dictate the pace of much of the action. They're also dictating a lot of our lives as New Mexico unveils the next steps in its vaccination plan and tries to avoid costly and embarrassing mistakes in determining just who should get a vaccine. And of course, by the time next week's show comes around, we'll have a new president. The ignominious end to the Trump administration may have lasting impacts for Republicans. Here's the line. On Tuesday, for the fourth time in 12 months, lawmakers will come to the state capitol as New Mexico navigates its way through the pandemic. As it has for each of the special sessions, lawmaking will look different as it takes place largely online. Here to talk through what we expect is our Line Opinion panel, journalists and professionals who've agreed to read up on this week's headlines and look behind them and offer their thoughts. Joining us are founder and president of Vox Optima Public Relations, that would be Merritt Allen. Longtime ad man and co-founder of Everybody Votes, our friend Dave Mulryan is here. Founder and director of the New Mexico Black Leadership Council, Catherine McGill returns. And back at our virtual table for the first time in a while is Capitol Bureau reporter Dan McKay of the Albuquerque Journal. Dan, I'm going to start with you here because you're the obvious place to start. A 2-month session in the middle of a pandemic. Let's talk about this. Lawmakers aren't planning on coming to the Capitol every day, are they? I want to get some clarity on that first.
Yeah, it's going to be an enormous cultural change for the legislators, lobbyists, advocates, everyone. The legislature is planning to do much of its work online. We're talking about virtual committee hearings over Zoom, allowing people to call in, that kind of thing. There is some talk about limiting the floor sessions, which is the meeting when all the legislators in a chamber are together, to avoid having these large gatherings all at once. But yes, it's going to be an unusual session for sure.
And Dan, for you and your peers, I got to imagine, it's my understanding that media and staff have testing requirements. How's that going to work? Lawmaker requirement, all that kind of thing. You're all in the same building, are you not? What's the situation there?
Yes, we're going to be required, media members are required to be tested we have to have a negative test within 5 days. Okay. So we'll probably get tested maybe once a week. There will be Department of Health testing on site that staff members and media can use. The legislators, I don't believe they can be required to take a test, but they are being encouraged to take one. Los Alamos National Laboratory did a lot of statistical modeling on how the session might contribute to disease spread. And one of their key recommendations was to do pretty vigorous testing, so that anyone who's positive, even if they aren't feeling sick, that it can be caught as quickly as possible and their contacts can be traced and isolation and quarantine procedures can be started.
I appreciate that. Just let the folks know what's happening up there on the nuts and bolts stuff. It's important. Kathy McGill, both the governor and lawmakers have released their recommended budgets. As we know, the Journal reported on this as well, as Dan knows. A big difference is pay raises for teachers and state workers in the legislative budget, but not in the governor's. How do you see this shaking out? Is something going to come out of it for raises for folks, or should they not plan on it for 2021?
I think that they should probably not plan on it. However, it seems like everyone is saying that the revenue is better than expected.
Right.
And so state employees are probably looking for that raise. But the reductions in the budgets are less than what was anticipated. It was 5%, and I think now 3.6% down. So there's room for raises, and I think that state employees are looking for raises because they've had had to make lots of pivots, working from home, doing lots of additional pivots to make sure that they can continue to provide service. I say they deserve it, and we got to look to see if there's a way that we can offer them cost of living adjustments that are commensurate with the changes in things that they have to cover just as individuals.
Dale Marion, as Kathy's talking there, it's interesting to consider David Abbey at the LFC Legislative Finance Committee actually pointed out state workers haven't had they've had raises in like fewer than half the years over the past dozen or so.
Right.
So I guess the same question, I don't want to get hung up on raises. We got a lot more to talk about, but
right.
Just a quick thought on that, and I want to pivot to something else with you real quick.
I mean, as far as I can see, you can never pay teachers and good, solid state employees too much. I mean, they deserve to be paid well, and I think that we should find the resources to pay them. But I would also think that it's important for us to recognize President-elect Joe Biden told us yesterday that he's not going to worry about the deficit. And so that has big implications for the states. And, when you look at what happened, say, during a major catastrophe when Franklin Roosevelt was looking to defeat Nazism, he and his Treasury Secretary, Robert Markenthau, got the deficit spending to about 140% of gross domestic product. We are not quite there. So we do have some latitude, that we can do some more deficit spending. And we certainly, money is very cheap. I mean, there is no yield, and you can do it. You can borrow it. I think that the state of New Mexico, they've been on it. I mean, they have gotten all of the FEMA grants for extended unemployment. Every time there was an opportunity for them to get federal money, they did not miss a beat. And I think they deserve a lot of credit. And I think we know that, look, if the window is open and the federal government is getting it out, New Mexico seems to be very good at getting first in line and getting it. And I think that's a great thing. Good
point there. Merritt, speaking of budget busting, or maybe not, the governor for pandemic relief, $475 million, LFC, or lawmakers, $250 million for roads, $300 million to backfill unemployment insurance. Let me talk about pandemic relief first, though. Anything strike you? It's a big number. That's a big number for around these parts, but we have a lot to recover from. What's your sense of that 475 the governor's asking?
Well, and I think many businesses are also going to be going to the federal pot as well. So, I mean, certainly with Paycheck Protection Plan opening back up, I think that's where many businesses will go to first, because that will come first and it will be easiest. So I think small businesses are going to be, from a business perspective, businesses are going to line up for the second round of Paycheck Protection Plan loans. And in fact, businesses can even go back to the well a second time. So there's going to be that. Then there will be state and local funds available there. So it's a lot. I think it may be considered a drop in the bucket compared to what's coming from the federal relief. Right. I think it's cushion. It would not surprise me if it doesn't take a few months for the state fund to be depleted, or if it's even not completely depleted, because the federal money coming in will be so tremendous.
Interesting point there. Dan McKinley, swing to education here real quick. Both budgets, meaning the governor and LFC, boost money for extended learning programs. And of course, there's the constitutional amendment, of course, asking to take a bigger bite of the permanent fund for early childhood education. I got to ask, in your sense, is this the year that has a possibility of passing, actually dipping into this?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that this is probably the supporters have reason to be optimistic beyond any year before. The permanent fund issue was debated pretty thoroughly in primaries. We have 11 of the 42 members of the state Senate are going to be new to the chamber. Several of the key Senate leaders have lost their primary challenges to more liberal senators. So the composition of the Senate has changed a lot. And that is key for this issue because it has passed the House 4 straight years, and the hangup has been the Senate. So I would say things are are looking reasonably good for that. But again, it's, I wouldn't underestimate how many potential snags there are for any bill, even if everybody supports it.
Very good point.
It could be that senators decide, they support capping the permanent fund, but they don't want to use it for the same purpose the House does. I mean, there are all kinds of potential debates that could arise, but I would say that it could reach the finish line this year.
Hey, Dan, I got a quick question for you. Something just came to mind that's kind of interesting. Chairmanships for committees. Any sense of where that's headed at this point? And when will we know? Is there a traditional time when these things are let out to the public? I'm confused how that process works, but do you have a sense of that at this point?
I don't think that we're going to know the chairpersons for the key Senate committees until after the session starts. Okay. The most important first thing that happens is that the Senate is going to choose a new Senate President pro tem. Mary Kay Papin, the longtime president, she lost her reelection bid in the primary. She was among the more moderate or conservative Democrats. The leading candidate to replace her, nominated by Democrats, is Mimi Stewart. She's an Albuquerque Democrat, considered much more liberal than Papin. And assuming Mimi Stewart is confirmed as president, she will have tremendous influence over who the committee chairs are. Several of the more moderate or conservative Democrats were committee chairs who lost in the primary. So I think the expectation is that they will be replaced by more liberal members, and that really could change the political landscape in the Senate. But we probably won't know till that first week. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Merritt, real quick, we're down about a minute and a half. I want to get you and Kathy in on a question each. You're on the redistricting task force. Seems to be set to recommend a 7-member commission to handle the task every decade. What's the quick take on what we should expect out of this group?
You'll be seeing legislation, bipartisan, sponsored by Senators Ortiz y Pinto and Senator Moores. And it will call for an independent redistricting commission, 7 members, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, 2 with no party affiliation whatsoever. It will be chaired by a retired Supreme Court justice. And they will be required to have no fewer than 12 public hearings as they draw maps for the U.S. Congress, U.S. State legislature districts, and State Public Education Commission. This is a big deal because we do not have any specific process for redistricting. It's different every 10 years. It's a different process. Too often, lawmakers are the ones who are deciding the districts, not the voters. And so lawmakers choose districts, voters have no say. And so this brings fairness, it brings transparency, and it ensures complete compliance with the Voting Rights Act, which is really the most important thing we're talking about here. And it protects our underserved communities and populations. So I was really pleased to be on the task force. I also need to mention that line panelist Tom Garrity was also on the task force. A number of legislators, a number of tribal and Pueblo representatives, as well as just community and business leaders around the state. Very satisfying work. I'm proud of the recommendations we came for, and you can read the report at newmexicofirst.org, but look out for that legislation. And please, if you support fairness and transparency in redistricting, call your legislator and tell them to support the establishment of the redistricting commission.
I want to talk to you more about that in detail a little bit later. Kathy, super quick, I can't leave you out though. Can folks really expect to feel they're part of the democratic process during this Zoom period with our legislature, our citizen legislature? What's your sense of that? Can we really serve folks with this system?
I think so. I think in the midst of adversity or difficulty, as Einstein said, lies opportunity. There's an opportunity for people who may never have traveled to Santa Fe to be a part of a committee hearing, on a Zoom call and listen to what's going on and how we're deliberating these policies and procedures. And so I think that it actually opens up a new frontier for people to be able to participate, and that it is going to change the way we do all kinds of things. We do a lot of training in New Mexico Black Leadership Council. And so we think the future of training is going to be online. And so I think this is there's an opportunity for us to participate.
Well said. I have to agree. I think there's a good opportunity here. We appreciate that for sure. We'll be watching closely both the debates and the impact of COVID-19. Speaking of, we want to take some time this week to check in with Jonathan Nez, president of the Navajo Nation, one of the largest tribes geographically, certainly, and by population. The Navajo have been hit hard by COVID-19 with more than 25,000 positive cases and more than 800 deaths. While continuing curfews and lockdowns, the Navajo Nation is being aggressive with its vaccination efforts. NMIF correspondent Antonio Gonzalez talks with the tribe's top leader about plans for the new year.
President Jonathan Nez, welcome back to New Mexico in Focus.
Hey, thank you for having us, Antonio, and all your viewers. Good day to everybody.
And President Nez, you joined us back in March of 2020, shortly after COVID-19 hit the Navajo Nation. Tribes now in another wave. The Navajo Nation has been recognized nationally for its fight against the virus, which has included some really strict measures, stay-at-home orders, lockdowns, curfews, mask mandates. How has the tribe, with more than 150,000 residents in 3 states, been able to fight the virus as we're seeing the numbers flatten now?
First of all, I just want to say thank you to our Navajo citizens. They have been very open to the strict protocols that we have put in place. Our nation has been hit hard with the virus, and the Navajo people respected and honored their public health professionals by listening these recommendations that have come from the Department of Health and Human Services, through the CDC, and through our Health Command Operations Center, our Indian Health Services, our 638 facilities on the Navajo Nation. So all the recognition should go to our Navajo people for doing that. Of course, we as leaders have listened, and we have been surrounded by experts in public health as well as in science. And when they recommend certain things for our people, we put it into policy, regulations, and laws. And that's what I truly believe has saved many, many lives here on the Navajo Nation. But don't get me wrong, over 800 people lost their lives to COVID-19 on the nation, and our thoughts and prayers go out to each and every one of them, their families, for going through these difficult times. But as a nation, we are united in our efforts to push back on COVID-19. And 80%, I say over 80% of our Navajo people have followed the protocols that have been put in place. Of course, you have some that don't tend to listen, but I think overall our culture, our way of life teaching has assisted in respecting one another through these trying times, and really commend the Navajo people for honoring and respecting authority.
And can you talk a little bit about the vaccine rollout, healthcare right now? You've done frontline workers, vulnerable populations. You yourself and some other tribal officials have received the vaccine, and now elders are getting the vaccine. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. We received, well, let me go step back a bit. We've been advocating here on the Navajo Nation that we should receive the doses at the same time every state throughout this country receives those vaccines. And I think with the tribal leaders' advocacy and Indian Health Services advocacy, we were able to get the Pfizer vaccines the same day that the rest of the country received their vaccines. And that's commendable. And I want to say thank you to the tribal leaders throughout the country who have advocated to keep our people safe and getting the vaccines. Of course, those are for those that want it. We're not forcing people to get the vaccines. It's voluntary. Here on the Navajo Nation, Pfizer, we have a relationship with them. Over 200 residents of the Navajo Nation have been a part of the clinical trials for Pfizer and BioNTech, and about 80% of those are Navajo people. And so we know that the efficacy is there, and first and second doses, 95% pushing back on the virus is good statistics. And even our own Navajo professionals, our Navajo medical doctors, have really advocated that our Navajo citizens get vaccinated. And so there's been a big interest here on the Navajo Nation to take the vaccine. Of course, you might have known New Year's Eve, myself and other leaders of the nation and IHS leaders took the Pfizer vaccine. And the reason we did that was, of course, the first phase 1A were healthcare professionals and those that are on the front lines in the healthcare field got their vaccines, got their shots. And of course, they're well informed of, the side effects, what goes into the vaccines. As we started to go to phase 1B, our elders and our high-risk patients, there was beginning to be a lot of questions, a lot of hesitancy from our elders to not take the vaccine. So, as a leader of the Navajo Nation, I thought it was important for us to roll up our sleeves as leaders and to bring some confidence to the shot, the vaccine, and so that our elders could, have some comfort that, at least their leader, their top leader, and the lawmakers, IHS leaders as well, took the vaccine so that they can be able to be covered, protected from catching this virus. So overall, we received 26,000 doses thus far as of today. And out of that 26,000, 18,000 have been put into the arms of our Navajo citizens. So that's about 68% of these doses going into the arms of our people, which is a very high percentage compared to the rest of the country. And so our goal is whoever wants the vaccine, based on the prioritization, we want them to be able to get the vaccine if they want. And as we move down, I think we're going to be going into essential workers, government workers, businesses as well. And so this helps us as leaders advocate to the federal government for more doses to come to the Navajo Nation, because we can show the track record. I can say now, today, to the federal government that 68% of the total doses that came to Navajo have been put into the arms of our Navajo citizens.
President Nez, you had mentioned unity a few minutes ago, and you're not only encouraging Navajo citizens to stay vigilant in their fight against COVID-19, but you encourage exercising, eating well, but also to avoid any kind of negativity. We're seeing so much division in the U.S. right now. You denounced violence at the U.S. Capitol. So what's your message of unity to Navajo citizens?
Well, the enemy is not our neighbors, or our enemies is not with one another. The fight is not with one another. The enemy is COVID-19. And in our way of life teaching, that's the monster. That's the modern day monster that we are supposed to focus on, to push back on, to fight against. And I think if we can all recognize that throughout this country, that the fight isn't with one another. The fight is against this unseen virus that has come into our homes, our communities, and our country and our tribal nations, I think people will have a different outlook if they can take a glimpse through an indigenous lens like us. I think it would be helpful to recognize that our true enemy is COVID-19. And that is the reason why I believe our way of life teaching and our culture, utilizing that, has really helped us in pushing back on this virus here on the Navajo Nation. As you know, Antonia, Navajo people since time immemorial, there's stories about the hero twins, monsters coming in to take over the people and demolish and devastate them. And yet there are heroes that were sent to fight off these monsters. And today it's no different. We have modern day monsters. We got COVID-19, we got diabetes, we got heart disease, cardiovascular disease. We have domestic violence, sexual violence. You know, these modern day monsters are there, but we do have the weapons to combat the enemy. And for instance, for COVID-19, if you're going into battle, you have to be equipped, or you have to have the armor to fight off your enemy. And one of the pieces of armor is a mask, is to wash your hands with soap and water, to social distance, and to stay home. In our tradition, home is the place where sovereignty begins. And then we delegate that to others. For instance, in an election, we delegate our individual sovereignty, our inherent sovereignty, to an individual to make decisions on our behalf. And those are our lawmakers and the president. And that's how we view things through our lens as Indigenous peoples here in this country.
Well, thank you for sharing the resilience of the Navajo Nation and Indigenous people across the country. President Jonathan Nez of the Navajo Nation, thank you for joining us again on New Mexico PBS.
Thank you for having us, Antonia. God bless everyone.
Vaccinations have been all the talk in the rest of New Mexico, too. State Health Secretary Dr. Tracy Collins says healthcare systems are quickly vaccinating their frontline workers as the state heads into the next phase of vaccinations for older New Mexicans and those with underlying conditions. She briefed the media this week, as did leaders of the state's three biggest healthcare systems. We try to stream those live for you on Facebook as often as we can, but this was a particularly important week. Here's a bit of what Dr. Collins had to say, followed by medical experts from Presbyterian, Loveless, and UNM.
As of today, we've had more than 170,000 doses delivered to New Mexico, and we've administered 78,143 doses. Within the last 7 days, we've administered more than 30,000 doses, and this again is based on 81% of providers reporting. So the good news is New Mexico has one of the highest administration rates in the country. Within the last 3 weeks, we've had nearly 400,000 New Mexicans to register for their vaccine. We encourage all of you to register. It is the way that you can get yourself in the queue, and then we can follow up with an appointment so that you can get your vaccine. You can modify your profiles at any time, and again, you will receive notification when vaccine is available at a nearby location. So I wanted to walk you through the phases for distributing the vaccine. So as you know, phase 1A was the phase we were in just before we opened up 1B. And 1A, just to reiterate, hospital personnel and personnel in congregate settings. And so we've now opened up 1B. And I want you to understand that we're starting with, in sequential order, persons 75 years of age or older, and then persons 16 or older with at least one chronic condition, and then persons who are frontline essential workers, followed by vulnerable populations. And I really want to encourage persons who are N1A or 75 years of age or older to make sure you're registered so that we can move you to the front of the line and get your vaccine. Now, when we talk about sequential, what we're wanting to do is to reach as many as we can who are 75 or older, and then move to those who are 16 or older with at least one chronic condition. Those conditions can include cancer, chronic kidney disease, immunocompromised, asthma, obesity, or hypertension. What I just read there is not an exhaustive list, but it gives you an example of what we mean by a chronic condition. Please keep in mind that a substantial number of New Mexicans will meet eligibility based on that one group, being 16 or older with one chronic condition. We also have frontline essential workers who are key to keeping us functional, and that includes K through 12 educators or those who work in higher education who cannot work remotely, and grocery store workers. And again, we have a list that we've made available that includes frontline essential workers. As far as vulnerable populations, we're talking about shelters, about our youth, about detention centers, correctional facilities. These are vulnerable populations because these are people most likely to be infected who don't have the option of distancing themselves. And so they're more at risk for COVID and they're more at risk for dying. So we really have to be very efficient and strategic in getting them vaccinated as doses are available. After 1B, which we're looking at covering the winter through the spring, we'll move to 1C. And then after 1C, we'll move to phase 2, which is a general population.
Dr. Collins, and I apologize if you've covered this to any extent, do you sort of expect a steady stream of vaccination doses? Do you expect that to increase as production increases? And how far out do you know how much you're going to get? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Matt. So we do expect currently a steady stream, but we're looking each day. And as we have a new administration coming in the door, we're hoping that that supply increases, but we will know more later. And so really the idea is to vaccinate as many people as we can and to reevaluate on an ongoing basis the doses we have and how many more people we can vaccinate.
The progress that New Mexico has made regarding vaccinations is truly remarkable. We're standing out in this country in a very positive way. We're excited to support the state Department of Health as they move through the next phase of vaccinations. We're encouraged by the number of healthcare workers who have stepped forward to receive the vaccine. To date, Presbyterian has administered over 11,000 doses. But the hope of the vaccine must be balanced with the reality that COVID-19 is still spreading in our community. Our state and local percent of positive COVID tests remains too high, as are hospitalizations and daily case counts too high. We must remain vigilant about protecting ourselves and those we love. While vaccine efforts do continue, we encourage New Mexicans to continue practicing COVID-safe behaviors, such as avoiding large gatherings and wearing masks properly over our noses and mouths when we're out in public anytime.
Here at Lovelace, as well as the rest of our health systems across the state, we're supporting the state in these efforts. And as already been mentioned, our state is doing really well. We're really moving in the right direction to be able to try and vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. We've so far have done about 65% of our employees and want to continue with concentration on those high-risk groups. And now that we're in phase 1B.
So far, UNM has given in excess of 10,000 doses throughout our health system. We're still focused on healthcare workers who have direct patient interactions on a regular basis. Administrative staff or those who are working from home are now being encouraged to utilize the Department of Health website. We're not intending to do anything other than shift to utilizing the website for the rest of our employees.
We have seen some increase interested people who originally said, I'm not sure about taking the vaccine and had some reluctance. And now that I think they have seen their colleagues take the vaccine without problems, we've had additional people sign up for their first doses. So now that the state has allowed us to move to 1B, we will be expanding what we're able to do. And so we're actively making plans to be able to move into our next level or next tier.
COVID count numbers may be coming down, but this is our high season. So overall hospitalization numbers are still quite high. For the second part with regards to morale, it was immediate boost in morale. People finally had hope that there was light at the end of the tunnel, that perhaps we could become more normal by the end of this year.
And again, I think the reduction in stress for people to feel that they have a measure of protection. Of course, they're still wearing PPE and doing all the appropriate things, but it's just an additional measure that gave them security. So I think it has helped. The numbers coming down has been helpful. I think people have seen how the community and state has pulled together and tried to make a huge effort to reduce those numbers. And so, we thank everyone for doing that, because that has been exceptionally helpful as well.
Yeah, I can't overemphasize the joy and relief that our workforce has had with the advent of the vaccination. And I think also starting to see that we're on what appears to be a downslope in terms of hospitalizations and the number of COVID cases occurring in our community. Those things combined have really boosted morale significantly and given our frontline workers the added juice to keep going forward. These are tough times, and our healthcare workforce has been working hard.
With New Mexico taking the first step into phase 1B of vaccinations, and again, that means people over age 75 and those 16 and older if they have a pre-existing conditions. It seems we're starting to turn the corner, or at least we can see the corner from here. That means something. You just heard about the difference that makes for first-line medical workers who have been battling this day in and day out since last March. And Kathy McGill, what kind of difference have you seen it make among people you know? And I want to know specifically trust in the African American community that the vaccine is safe and effective. What's the feedback you're getting?
The jury's still out in the community about people who are willing to take the vaccine because of the historical distrust of vaccines that come from the government and not understanding perhaps why it's necessary right now for us to be the first doctors. But there are a lot of people, and I think the opinions are varied in the community. I signed up to register to get a vaccine today, and while my number hasn't come up yet, when it does come up, I'm going to take it. But I understand how people want more information, and I think that we need to do a better job of getting information about the efficacy of it and sort of, combating the disinformation about, anecdotal things that people hear about people who've had bad reactions to the vaccine. So I'm hoping that we're able to do more of an education campaign, but there's varied responses in the Black community and in all communities about whether or not we can really trust this because of all the misinformation that's out there.
Right. Hey, Merritt, it's interesting, this idea about equitable distribution. People are going to be people. And there were reports last week that event codes were being unfairly shared with family members and friends, and people were sharing stories about cutting in line and all this other stuff going on. I mean, people are just going to be people. Your sense of the rollout and how we can get our arms around this and get everybody vaccinated, given that people are going to do what they're going to do. What's your sense on that?
I don't know. There's only so much vaccine. I don't see I don't see too many ways to game the system. You go in with a name and a birth date. I've registered my entire family. So we have an 87-year-old and two 50-somethings. I mean, my mom is pretty good with makeup, but I'm pretty sure if I try and go in as her, people are going to figure it out.
Interesting. I'm with you.
So-
I'm with you. They'll figure it out. They'll figure it
Yeah,
out.
I don't think it's. I just don't think there's enough cheating going on to be too worried about it. Will there be some?
Well, the state
Yes.
says they're on top of it now. The state says they're on to it.
I
So
think that's enough of a risk to be concerned about. I think the main thing is to make sure that the distribution plan is such that we make sure that everyone is able to get the second dose
mm-hmm.
with the stocks we have, and just that level of planning and logistics. That's my primary concern, rather than I'm more concerned about the distribution planning end rather than the consumer end, and who might be sketchy about it.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Hey, Dave, interesting announcement the other day that the UNM announced that the pit will be available for vaccinations, for mass vaccinations. Shouldn't leave that word out. We're talking 1,600 people a day starting next Tuesday, then more than 3,000 a day 3 weeks later. I guess my question is this, Phase 1B, especially the underlying conditions. We're talking about a huge group of people here, upwards of 500,000 in some reports here in New Mexico. So does that change things on our vaccination rollout? Do we have to lead into this?
Let's go back one little thing. So when after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt stood up in front of the country and said, we are really caught unawares here, and we need to build 50,000 airplanes to combat what's coming. And, every expert said that's not possible. We can't do it. Yet here we are. I think we need leadership. I think we're going to get that leadership with the new administration coming. The American people will do very well if they're told what to do, if we have good leadership. And I think we're starting to see we're just about to hit critical mass. We're going to get a huge amount of vaccinations happening. People have questions and people are worried. Yet, I had a mother who lived through the polio epidemic. She could not wait to get us those vaccinations every year. And I think it's important to recognize that's where we need to go, but we need leadership at the state and at the federal level to get there. And I think we're going to get it.
Interesting stuff there. Dan McDan, a holiday uptick. We've heard about this, the Christmas season, of course. We're now just getting into the window where we should see some impact. Any concerns?
Yeah, there was pretty sharp growth early this year. After maybe about 2 weeks after Christmas, there was pretty sharp growth, and we have seen an uptick in cases. Over the last few days, there's been kind of a leveling off. So it could be that that we've seen the extent of the bump, but it's hard to know. We're also not 2 weeks out, or we're just approaching 2 weeks from New Year's Eve. So so we might start to see a bump from that also. But it looks like for the most part we're pretty stable, but at a high case level. We're not anywhere near the state's reopening goals. So cases are going to have to come down substantially before we start to get to that.
This week, I forgot the county, but somebody went green this week, if I'm not mistaken, first time in since this new system. Kathy McGill, we also have the first case of the more contagious strain out of the UK has landed in New Mexico, literally, as somebody that traveled over there. Does this help, redouble the effort, so to speak? Does this scary new strain make people say, all right, the mask thing's more important than ever now, distance, all that kind of thing, or is it just another data point for people?
No, I think people are, have a heightened concern about a new strain, a new variant of the virus. And, I think the people that I'm talking to are redoubling their efforts to stay shelter in place if they can, and to follow the protocols. So, yeah, there's a heightened awareness, and it's getting closer, I think, as the virus continues to spread. I know that I have people in my close circle who have been infected with the virus, and people that I know who have lost their battle. Yep. And so it makes it very personally something that I'm looking at, and I think a lot of people are in that same situation.
I hear that. I'm still mourning. One of the great friends of Albuquerque, DZ Chavez, passed away from COVID about a month and a half ago. I'm still working my way through that one, that's for sure. Let's talk schools for a minute. Merritt, Phase 1B also includes frontline workers unable to work remotely, and teachers are part of that group as well. Do you think teachers and students will be able to get back into the classroom, obviously before the end of the year?
There are certain teachers and educational employees who are already in the classroom. So that has to happen. A family member of mine works with special needs children who really have to be in a classroom environment. So given the difficulty of maintaining social distancing protocols with that specific student population, it's absolutely vital. Whether that will get teachers and students back in the classroom quickly, it certainly won't happen, I don't think, this school year, just given the overall conservative mindset of this state. I mean, let's remember New Mexico is one of the most, has among the strictest requirements in the nation, and has not let up and has never really reopened since March. So I think it highly unlikely that students will be back in the classroom in the 2021 school year.
Dan, let me ask you to pick up on that too, or as well. Do I have it right that the governor is leaving these choices to individual school districts and the folks that run them, or is this going to be sort of an edict statewide as things go along?
I think at this point it's county by county, and it depends on what statistical information there is on the spread and the prevalence of the virus. The governor has indicated that she wants to look more closely at getting schools reopened this semester. But again, her the power is divided a bit between school districts and the public education department. I do think, one of the key things for reopening schools is just going to be the spread of the virus. And we're kind of have this race between getting the vaccine out to people, hopefully before this new, more transmissible strain of the virus starts to circulate.
I think you're right. It's all going to be depending on what the numbers show at that time. As Merritt said, maybe 2021 might not happen. We're out of time. We'll take a quick break to reset, then be back to talk about what's ahead for Republicans and conservatives after the stunning final weeks of the Trump presidency. New Mexico in Focus is on Twitter and Facebook. Follow us online to get updates on upcoming shows and tell us what you think about the top news stories of the week. Then tune in because we may share your comments on the line. After urging supporters to march on the Capitol and at times using violent language to do so, President Trump has been impeached a second time. And while this was primarily a Democratic effort, 10 Republicans broke ranks to vote to impeach as well. Here at home, New Mexico's top Republicans are sticking with Trump. Over the weekend, Steve Pearce tweeted that Trump would be president, quote, forever. That is, of course, wrong and, most importantly, unconstitutional. Mr. Pearce deleted that tweet later, but in an interview with the Santa Fe New Mexican, he refused to admit the president might have played a role in the Capitol riot. Merritt, got to ask you first, what's the sense in the Republican Party about Mr. Pearce's unflinching stance? And we're going to get to Yvette Herrell in a second, but I want to talk about Mr. Pearce first. What's your sense of where he's been on this?
Well, it's not just Steve Pearce's, but one Republican in a party of millions. The Republican Party is split right now. There are Trump Republicans and there's the mainstream Republican Party. The president fomented an insurrection. He fomented the insurrection based on a lie. It was a 2-month lie he perpetuated about the results of an election. It was a planned agitprop Soviet-style misinformation campaign. It was for no reason but to try and overturn a constitutional process, which is, of course, our 4-year quadrennial presidential election. It's deadly serious. He's an unserious man who has threatened our democracy. So the Republican Party seems to, in some ways, think that even after last week, as of January 7th, they can keep going about their business. The RNC chairwoman has been elected to, on the national level, another term. And the Trump movement is eroding, but still there. And this can't continue. The Republicans who voted to object to electoral college votes need to acknowledge publicly the seriousness and wrongness of their actions, and the Republican Party must repudiate Trumpism immediately and move on with a fresh slate for 2022. And importantly, the entire GOP organization has to rebuild voter confidence and trust in our elections with proactive and thoughtful engagement and outreach, because thousands of American voters were convinced their votes were stolen thanks to this false misinformation campaign. And it's on the GOP to earn back their trust.
Good point there. Mr. Mulryan, I mentioned Yvette Herrell, our CD2 representative. And
yes.
Merritt just mentioned that everyone who stood up and opposed this in the Pennsylvania count and all that should be in some way held responsible, or we just know who they are. What's your sense of where, how Yvette Herrell's situation is going to play for either independents, Republicans? How are you reading the tea leaves from this?
I mean, there's an old saying, a week is a year in politics. And I think that, when we start looking at what's going to happen to Congresswoman Herrell down this road, we don't know. Yet, I would also say that one of the mistakes, and I believe it's a mistake, is that, there's no sense in fighting the last election. And, I think the Congresswoman is on the wrong side of this issue. Yet, Democrats should use that energy to look for a candidate that they can be for. And, this idea that we're going to remove her, that everything she's doing is wrong and all of that. There's some validity to what they're talking about. The Democrats also have to make a choice, and they have to say, let's move forward. We've got a new administration. One of the things that I keep thinking about is that 2020 was 1968, and that it is a very big change, and we have a huge number of new Republican women in Congress, and we have a larger number of gay representatives in Congress. We are clearly leaving the old America. We're heading towards a new America, and I think we should get there. We should concentrate on the future, be optimistic, and let's look forward.
Mm-hmm. Dan McKay, interestingly, I'm going to bring it back to home here. What's the Republican bench look like here in New Mexico? We just talked about Steve Pearce and Yvette Herrell. For leadership, for high-profile offices, what's going on with Republicans right now?
There are some younger Republican women who are legislators who are pretty active at the Roundhouse, who might be potential candidates. I don't know whether they're, what their interest is in running for things, but we recently saw Rebecca Dow is taking a leadership position within the House Republican caucus. She's been very active during floor debates. Kelly Fajardo from Valencia County was one of the leading legislators who worked on an anti-harassment policy a few years ago and raised questions about whether lobbyists were being taken advantage of. It's hard to see. A lot of the kind of Albuquerque area Republicans have been wiped out of the legislature. So a lot of the bench in terms of elected officials now, they're from more rural areas.
Interesting point there. Kathy McGill, I got a little bit of a switch up here on you, but it's interesting to me. Republican Senate candidate Mark Ronchetti's back on the air at KRQE 13 doing weather. Just sort of popped up out of nowhere as their chief meteorologist. The station has taken some heat on Facebook. I've seen a lot of people having a little bit of an issue. Should the station have said something, to let folks know why they're bringing him back?
Should they have said something to let people know why they're making an employment decision? I don't think so. I think they have a right to make that decision. And,
well, truly, but is this not? I mean, he outperformed Donald Trump here. I mean, he spent millions of dollars to elevate his name and his face. He's not like he's just a regular schmo off the street.
Yeah, I was shocked at the amount of support that he received, and at first downplayed it until I drove up to Rio Rancho and I saw all the signs. And he did very well, and they probably made a good business decision. Whether or not it loses them viewers and whether or not they care about that remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Merritt, you want to take on that one? I think it's kind of interesting, the Mark Ronchetti thing.
Surprised me, not at all. Not at all. And I'm sure there's probably something in his contract with regard to that. That was not a surprise. I also think he's a really good on-air personality. His voice is great. His patter's great. this isn't the last we're going to see of Mark Ronchetti.
As a candidate, do you mean?
Right. His whole campaign, showed the splits in the New Mexico GOP, not necessarily over President Trump, just over who controls New Mexico Republicans. The New Mexico GOP establishment, the official NMGOP was really focused on Yvette Herrell's race. They were not focused on the Senate. And he showed that he did not need the state party to be a highly successful candidate. So we're going to see more from Mark.
Interesting points. That's going to have to do it for the Line panel this week. I'm back in a moment with a few final thoughts as we head into the legislative session and the Biden presidency. For those of a certain vintage, the impeachment of Donald Trump this week marks the third presidency in which the House has started down that road. Nixon, Clinton, and now Trump. And technically that's four impeachments with Donald Trump's second. Twice. I mean, think about that. We can argue the merits of the first impeachment, but there's no getting around the need for the second. 10 Republicans agreed, and there are reports many more Republicans would have voted to impeach were they not worried about being killed. Killed by supporters of the mob that stormed our nation's capital. Think about that too. Members of our Congress afraid for their lives over a vote. I'd also ask you to imagine this. What if a mob rampaged through our roundhouse? A mob breaking windows and doors, running across the floor with zip ties, battling with state police. Why? It will be over a lie. Because that's what this whole mess is all about, a lie. The accusation that the election was stolen, the basis for this whole thing is a lie. No lie, no insurrection. Think about that too. Thanks again for joining us, for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and viewers like you.